Sometimes we look around on a frigid day like this at the number of people here and we go, well, a lot of people probably stayed home because of the cold. Well, I checked with Rosemary just before we processed in to inquire as to how many people are joining us via YouTube, via that camera right up there. And Rosemary said there were about 16 at the time. 37 people. 38 now. And it's 38 households who are joining us, so it may be more people. So we marvel at technology, and we wonder if sometimes this is a good idea to keep doing this, but then at other times we say, well, it does bring the Eucharist Mass to people, even though they can't be here in person. Today, we hear in Matthew's Gospel a continuation of the Sermon on the Mount. And many times we think that the Sermon on the Mount consists only of the 8 Beatitudes. Or, in Luke's case, the Sermon on the Plain, as he calls it, and there's only 4 Beatitudes. But this Gospel connotes a familiar tone, doesn't it? You are the salt of the earth, Jesus said. You are the light of the world. And so we might ask ourselves, really, we might ask ourselves collectively as church, as families, and we might ask ourselves individually as individual disciples. How am I? How are we salt and light? Are these just lovely quotes that are posted at the entrances to chapels and we admire them and then go along our way? Or do they have an everyday transformative impact on our lives? In the days of Jesus, salt was essential. Those were the days before high blood pressure. But salt was really essential. And as we know from our own experience, salt is not at the top of the food chain. And I wonder why Jesus didn't choose some other items for inclusion on the Sermon on the Mount, other items to guide our presence in this world. Why didn't he say, you are the finest wine? Or why didn't he say, you are a chef's scrumptious pastry? Or why didn't he say, especially on a frigid day like this, you are a warm blanket to others? Wouldn't that make us feel special rather than you're salt and light? By itself, salt is not of much use. By itself, you can't serve it as food. You can't drink it. It makes the land sterile and unable to produce. But perhaps Jesus used salt, which would have resonated with the people in his own time, because in salt, we have an identity that goes to the benefit of others in the kingdom of heaven. Salt points beyond itself. And our lives as Christians, as those who are salty, as it were, our lives as Christians are meant to bring a certain zest to life and a meaning to our lives here on earth and to all who inhabit the earth. Just envision for a moment, if you will, Jesus is sitting beside you right now. And he's looking at you in the eye. And there's this wry smile on his face. And he says to you, you are. Not you were, not you will be, but you are the salt of the earth. And he goes on to say to you, just as salt is mixed with food and adds flavor, so too, he says, that you and I are invited to blend my message of love and forgiveness, says Jesus, into the world. So we are to be those who blend Jesus' love and forgiveness. We are to be the ones who actually live the gospel. Despite the gospel being so countercultural, doesn't it go against many of the norms that we hear in our society? We actually are salt. When we heed God's prophetic message that we heard in that first reading from Isaiah, it's very interesting. He said, remove from your midst oppression, false accusation, and malicious speech. It's a problem in our time, isn't it? It sounds like it was a problem at the time that the author of Isaiah wrote these words. But as Christians, we cannot stand idle. But Jesus' message is really to roll up our sleeves, and get into the human mix where you and I can make a difference for good. Light is Jesus' corollary image in this gospel. And like salt, light is not very useful on its own. Think about it. When we turn on a lamp, we don't stand there and look at the light bulb, do we? We don't look at the sun without some kind of filter. But light enables us to see things around us. The light Jesus is talking about is not there for its own sake, but rather it helps us see beyond, to see things that perhaps maybe we ordinarily wouldn't see, or maybe things that we take for granted and we just blow by them. Light enables us to see what darkness is covering up. And I don't know about you, but when I look around and just look at the world these days, isn't there an awful lot of darkness in so many different aspects of the world? And the danger is that you and I and humanity can be dragged down by that darkness. And perhaps we're like this little 4-year-old boy named George. And George was so excited that he was going to go to preschool the next day. So the alarm went off, and he got up, and he rushed toward the bathroom, and he missed the bathroom door and smacked right into the wall. Well, his mother heard the smack and said, George, are you okay? And George said, yeah, I'm okay. I think I just ran into darkness. You know, you and I don't need to cover our light with a bushel basket where nobody can see it. We're like little George sometimes. There's too much dark in my eyes, he said. And we tend to be wrapped up in our own agendas. We tend to be so I-focused. We're weighed down by all kinds of worries and frets and fear. And it's at those times that light needs to shine, that we need to shine it on others and allow others to shine their light on us. And with the grace of God, Paul said, you know, we rely ultimately on the power of God. But with the grace of God, we can choose to see anew. And we can choose to respond to the world's injustices that we can imagine as Jesus crucified. We see Jesus crucified in the plight of exiles and refugees. We see Jesus crucified in the degradation of God's wonderful creation. We see Jesus crucified in the ravages of violence and abuse. So as those gathered here as church to encounter the living Christ in the proclamation of the Word, in the Eucharist, and to encounter the living Christ in one another, may you and I go forth from this sacred space full of zest and flavor to bring the Christian message to all we meet, and to be the spirit of light that overcomes the darkness. And may it be so.